We are recording. We're doing a new podcast, another edition of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. Because, as fans, we've realized that sometimes wrestling just doesn't make any sense. Um, so we're going to talk about some of the ways it doesn't make sense. Today we're going to talk about NXT and about how cool it is, and about how it doesn't make sense that it's so cool and yet Raw and SmackDown are so crappy. Amongst other things, I think. So NXT is pretty big. Well, yeah, it says pretty big.
Yeah,
It's making a name for itself and has done for a long time. Where like cool independent guys can kind of show up, and it's like a steady, reliable job. But also, it seems like on NXT there's a lot of uh, freedom for the wrestlers to kind of have their own input into matches and work a little more, if you will, and kind of show off a little bit about their characters and what they can do. Whereas it seems like on the main roster it's a little bit more stifled, which I suppose it has to be because it's to a bigger audience. But yeah, so NXT, it's been going for a long time though, as
yeah.
you
Well,
reminded me.
2010 was when it originally started in its old form as the kind of crappy game show version of it, where they were asked to carry kegs and jump around assault courses and all that kind of shitty action. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, it was more of a reality show, almost like reality competition where they were getting voted off week by week, and then yeah, you'd see guys like Daniel Bryan get voted off really quickly into the first season. It's like, what the hell?
yeah. So like all these guys had like mentors from
Yeah,
the main roster, so they get like new guys that most Raw and SmackDown fans wouldn't have known about, and they paired them up with veterans from the roster who would supposedly like guide them through the competition. But like,
mm,
I don't know how that is at all possible because like I think is obvious from our tone of voice. The kind of stuff they had to go through wasn't like regular stuff that a lot of other wrestlers have gone through.
no,
It's not like Dolph Ziggler can come up to his rookie and say, "Listen, guy, I've been working on lifting up these kegs and running around the ring all my life. I've got a strategy." Like the mentors, was a gimmick to tie it together, I guess, but it really had no purpose. You know,
mm,
I remember those days because, well, here's the thing: I never really watched NXT when it originally started
yeah,
because I wasn't really watching a lot of wrestling. I would only watch the pay per views sometimes. Um, but I remember that the payoff for that original NXT was very good. It was a
of
very good
course,
payoff. And the problem with subsequent seasons of that format of NXT was that they could never, ever deliver the kind of storyline that we got out of the first season.
yeah, not
The
without repeating themselves.
Exactly, the first season was really shocking the way it ended, which was a really smart, and like it justified the stupid competition
Yeah, yeah,
because it revealed that it was all a really big storyline. And it in retrospect it made the competition make sense because these guys were all being put through ridiculous challenges that they didn't think they deserved to be on or to go through, and so they all banded together and formed the Nexus, right?
that's right.
So it all
And
kind of made sense.
well, do you know how the second season of that old format of NXT ended? Like what the big angle was afterwards? It was
Um, was
it was basically Loki being paired up with Michelle McCool and Layla,
Yeah,
and that was it. He was is basically their dog's body for like a few shows before he had enough and quit.
Smart. Let me sidebar for a second, as I frequently do, and just casually mention the fact that I don't care for Loki. I don't.
No, I don't
I'm.
think a lot of people really do.
I don't think he's that good. And like I remember in the first season, everybody was raving about Daniel Bryan, who I was a little familiar with, but not like super familiar with. But they were also raving about Wade Barrett, which I was interested about because I'd never heard of that guy before. Turns out he was really good, and that made sense. But then for the second season, whenever Low Key was in, people were freaking out about Low Key being in it, and I'd seen him in TNA before, and I did not get it. I don't see it. Maybe that's just me, but I don't get the hype. But that's
Well,
yeah.
he was in a season with like guys like Michael McGillicuddy and Husky Harris, so I mean he kind of stood out a bit from all those guys, that's for sure.
Well, true, they had terrible names, but they are both competent workers. Who I would watch both of those guys in a match over Low Key.
Oh yeah, since like those NXT days, they've like totally kind of reinvented themselves. Well, Bray Wyatt obviously way more than Curtis Axel, but even still, like both are far and away better off now than they were when we were first introduced to them on like WWE television.
Yeah, they've done alright for themselves. Just about. But after season 1 and 2 of this new NXT, things kind of took a turn. I mean, for me, it took a turn after season 1 because like I said, they couldn't really deliver upon the cool shock factor of. Do you remember whenever the Nexus like destroyed everything?
Yeah,
like
that was such a cool angle.
Yeah, it was so cool to watch because you're like, wow, they're really fucking. They ripped the fucking place apart.
Yeah,
it was really cool, and you're like, wow, I haven't seen this before, or well, in a while. I guess well, it wasn't even similar to the NWO because it was just like, no, we're here and we're fucking your shit up.
Yeah.
There was no like tease or anything like that. It was like, no, we've had enough. We're gonna do this. Now, of course, it eventually kind of petered out and didn't go anywhere, and they totally dropped the ball with that one. Like there was a lot of missed opportunities in that whole Nexus thing, which was a real shame because they were hot when they came out.
Yeah.
And they totally kind of dropped the ball with that. And then the second one, like you said, low key won, didn't he?
Yeah.
But then like low key on TV isn't as exciting as what we just saw the year before that with the Nexus, especially given that they didn't do anything with low key, so the whole thing was moot anyway. Like it made the blow off to the first season justified that entire thing existing, whereas the second time they had no idea what the payoff was going to be. They just brought it back because it was a thing they did, and that's why it didn't work. And then I think after that they just continued that trend. There was a point where they knew it was garbage and they kept putting it on TV. And that's because I don't know if this was season 4 or whatever, but there was a season where CM Punk was doing commentary on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Cole was he a heel at this point?
Yeah, I think it was around that sort of time, yeah.
He was also very derogatory towards the program. So it was really strange watching this dumb show and then having the commentators themselves talking about how stupid it is. I mean, like, as you know me, I appreciate that. I think it's funny. However, from a business standpoint, you have to question the logistics behind that. To go, this is our program. We know it's dumb, so we're gonna talk about how stupid it is. It was a strange angle. Do you remember that season?
Yeah, I think that might have been like the last season of it, which was where they basically got all the losers from some of like the previous seasons and like did a like NXT style elimination thing with all of these guys. So all these guys you've seen before, yeah, but who obviously didn't make that much of an impression in the first place because they all got voted off the previous seasons. So it's like, well, why should we care about these guys now?
Right.
Like they're still the same losers that we were watching before. So
exactly.
yeah, who gives a shit?
It's in exactly the same tone. It's like, what, you know, do you remember all the guys that you didn't like from the first couple of seasons? Well, here they are again, and you're like, well, you didn't like them the first time. Why are they back? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I think the one CM Punk was doing commentary on didn't they do an all women's one?
Yes, they did. Yeah, that was season 3 of it.
Okay, well, so by season 3, they had already given up. Oh dear! And then what was the one that EC3 won?
He didn't win one. I think he came second to Johnny Curtis.
Fandango won it. That's right. Oh yes. Okay. Or yeah, Johnny Curtis and Derek Bateman.
That's the ones. Yep.
As you've no doubt been able to gather from our naming of some of the people from Nexus, or not from Nexus, from NXT. Again, after season 1, names were not their forte.
Good grief.
Yeah, some of them were... Derek Bateman, by the way, I love as a wrestling name because that's pretty high up there in, like, least intimidating names. Derek Bateman? Uh-oh. Better watch out for that guy, you know? Yeah, oh yeah, because wasn't that the one where Fandango poured milk all over himself? That was after that.
Been, pretty much blocked that out.
Wasn't that part of the thing? Once he won it, he was like guaranteed a title shot, but they didn't specify what title or when he would get it. So wasn't it that there were loads of like backstage segments where he was like waiting around, not doing anything, and like one of them he poured milk over himself as if to say there's no point in crying over spilt milk, which doesn't apply at all because he won. So yeah, but there was, and then eventually they gave him a shot, and it was like a tag team title match with R-Truth, and that was his title shot that he got for winning and pouring milk over himself, you know.
Yeah, that does sound familiar.
As you can see, like, not only did the names get worse, but like the prize for winning also decreased to the point where they didn't even know what the prize was, you know. So NXT in its original form was
shit.
Well, yeah, that's pretty close to what I was gonna say. Not good was the phrase I was going with, but shit works as well. That was, what was that, season 4?
Yeah, season 4, and then season 5 was the one with all the losers.
Okay.
And then I think they did have plans for season 6, but they basically scrapped that and realized this is just getting worse and worse. So let's take this like NXT name and let's basically replace our development kind of league that they had in Florida at the time, which was FCW, and like just do that properly and use that as a way of putting superstars on TV and giving them a chance to kind of learn the ropes and work in front of crowds, get used to performing on TV and all that kind of jazz. So it was 2012 when those changes started coming in. And good God almighty, it's definitely paid off because it's a whole lot better than what we had before, that's for sure.
I mean, like, literally a whole other show.
Yeah.
I mean, not just in formatting, but, like, in entertainment value. It's night and day between those two things, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, they turned it into, like, their training grounds, I guess. But the smart thing they did was teaming up with Full Sail University.
Oh, yeah.
Because those guys do a lot of, like, media things. and
Mm.
and so they got Full Sail to tape it all for them, and
But
then
not only that, but like they guaranteed hot crowds in Full Sail University. Like every NXT show you watch, basically, the crowd are into everything. Whereas the old style NXT was basically being taped before or after SmackDown, I think, in front of like crowds who were either like half gone already, like catching their ride back home, or just weren't interested whatsoever. So it makes a world of difference having like a big rowdy crowd like who are into everything you're doing compared to people who just don't really care.
it really, like, legit really does make a difference when you're watching it. When the crowd's involved, you get more involved as well. I think it makes a real difference. Um, yeah. So then, I lost my train of thought. I was just thinking about those hot NXT crowds, man. What are they hot? So then they started filming it, and then did they put it on their website? Because this was before the network, right?
I think we still had it on Sky Sports over here.
Okay.
For the first few years. I'm not sure where it aired in America, but yeah, we definitely had it on Sky Sports.
Okay, because when did the network turn up? 2014?
Yeah, it must be either 14 or 15.
Yeah. So there was a couple of years where NXT, yeah, would have been on their website or would have been on Sky or whatever, but wasn't like that. I never find it that easy to, because I never had Sky, so I never find it that easy to, access. Not that I was, too particularly interested in it, because, at the time, we, as fans, were all still fresh off the other 4 or 5 seasons of NXT, and we were aware of what it had turned into. So, like, I think maybe some people were a little apprehensive about the new show. But then, once they started talking about some of the guys they were signing up, opinions would change. Because
absolutely.
then they started signing up some really good guys and bringing them to NXT. And like we said before, because NXT was it was a smaller crowd, smaller venue with a hot crowd and with a really good facility around it, where it was really low key, no pun intended, where people, like you said, could practice all the stuff that they were about to go on to, because it's a lot of those guys working independents have never worked a crowd as big as Raw or SmackDown.
Yeah,
it's a fact. So to get a good audience in, but also, which is very important, not just have the good audience to test, how good they are, but to also have a really good staff of, veteran wrestlers and other members of the WWE crew to be watching them at the same time as well, because then they can help to give pointers and help them out and stuff like that, which is invaluable, really. I mean, that honestly should be the reason a lot of people would go to NXT, is not just for the exposure, but for the sheer wealth of wrestling knowledge you're going to obtain just from being there and training
absolutely.
there and talking.
I mean,
to all
you
the
think
people.
back in the early days, they had like Dusty Rhodes there, like pretty much, giving promo classes like every other day or whatever in the performance center. You got like William Regal sharing his knowledge and expertise, and like all these guys who've obviously been at the top and kind of had great careers and stuff, just passing on all this knowledge.
Yeah.
And like, what better way for brand new superstars to come in and kind of learn the ropes and pick up stuff that they're just not gonna pick up on the independent scene.
Exactly.
It's just, it's invaluable.
Yeah, dude, it's like it's worth taking the trip and signing that contract for to get that because there's so many people who work with the WWE, not just on the main roster, but like so many of the legends that
Mm.
still have a good relationship with them. Like they would have guest trainers and stuff at the show that they could pick their brain. Like Lance Storm has been a guest there a couple of times,
Yeah.
and that guy knows his shit. Shawn Michaels has turned up there a bunch of times. You
I
know,
think he pretty much works there now,
oh, does he work
like
there
full
now?
time.
Oh, good stuff, man. You
Yeah.
know, but like he used to make little, you know, occasional appearances. You know,
Mhm.
other guys, even guys from the main roster would come down. You know, Triple H is probably always around. You know, pick his brain a little bit, just see how it goes, or he'll give you pointers and stuff like that. Um, really, at that point, to now, NXT like was turned from like the jokiest of joke wrestling to like a really valuable place to work. Because like before that, if you were an independent wrestler and you said, "Oh, I've been on NXT," and it was like season 4, you know, that nobody cared about,
Yeah.
that's not that big of a deal. Yeah, like minor, you know, national television exposure, but it's not nothing, nothing really that would show off your wrestling skills. Whereas on the flip side, the newer NXT, you would still be wrestling in front of smaller crowds, but the skills you would learn and the people you would talk to and the connections you would make are all like just, you know, totally worth the price. You know, um,
Mm.
so early on these NXT shows, they had a lot of well, I'd say a lot of big names that are in wrestling now, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because like
Totally.
early doors, they would have had like Seth Rollins
Yeah. Yeah.
and Dean Ambrose,
Yeah.
and also Roman Reigns. Whenever
Yeah.
he
He
was,
appeared there briefly, I think, for like 3 shows or something.
there was a triple threat match between all three of them in NXT, which is pretty cool.
I think that's FCW.
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe that was right before they switched over.
Yeah.
You had Cesaro was there, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And Bray Wyatt was down there for a little bit.
Of course. Yeah.
Lots of big guys, which was really
Like,
cool.
and as you get later, you go to Finn Balor, like Kevin Owens, Samoa Joe,
Neville,
Sami Zayn, Rusev was there, Charlotte Flair,
Becky Lynch, Bayley,
Paige.
Sasha.
I mean, yeah, it's like a who's who. Like I was looking through the current like Raw and SmackDown rosters. It turns out, according to my count, there's like 26 out of 39 Raw superstars who were, brought up from NXT, and 9 out of 15 women there. And then over on SmackDown, there's like 15 out of 32 superstars brought up from NXT, and 11 out of 12 women. So it just goes to show you like how influential NXT is, like in terms of just putting people out there on the main roster.
Is Natalia the woman on SmackDown who wasn't in NXT?
No, she's
She's on Raw now.
Yeah.
She's on Raw now.
But she did have like a brief foray into NXT. Like I think she pretty much gave Charlotte one of her first like major matches where they both had, well, she had Bret Hart in her corner and Charlotte had Ric Flair in hers.
Nice. I gotta go watch that match. That sounds good. Is that on the network?
It should be, yeah.
Did they upload all of the old episodes of NXT?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. They've got all the episodes going right the way back to the crappy version.
Oh, good lord. Yeah, because we totally want to watch those. So yeah, NXT seemed to be the place to be, and it still does kind of. Because at what point did they start doing their takeover shows?
I'm not sure, but it must have been.
We're talking network time, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it must have been when the network kicked in, whenever that was. So 2014 or 15.
Yeah, and it used to be that takeovers were like, what were they, the Friday or the Saturday before the big the
always
Saturday?
the Saturday, I think.
It used to be that the guys on the main roster. This is what I've heard. The guys on the main roster on the Sunday would watch. They'd seen NXT the night before and were blown away by how good they consistently were. And it used to be that they were like, "We're gonna up that. We're gonna beat that. We're the main roster. We're not gonna let these young punks upstage us." And then at some point, boy, they just didn't bother. At some point, they just watched NXT and said, "That not topping that," which I think we've alluded to before is more to do with the booking of both shows.
Yeah, it's more the constraints that they have, like on the main roster of what they can and can't do. Whereas in NXT, or especially on those takeovers, it's almost like they're encouraged to just go out there and have the absolute best match that they can have. And, like 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what they do on those shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for me, like, NXT TakeOver is the show that I look forward to seeing more than any other. Like, I think we get about 4 or 5 of them a year now. Because I think this year they added another one for the Money in the Bank weekend, whereas usually it's just like the big 4 pay-per-views.
Yeah.
But yeah, like every single takeover pretty much has always had like these ridiculous matches where it just goes back to kind of what made you fall in love with wrestling in the first place. Like the good stories, the quality characters, and then kick-ass matches. That's it, it's just wrestling boiled down to its like most simple, pure form. And you just kind of look at that, and then you look at the main roster and you think, well, why can't they do that as well then?
Yeah, some days it you really wonder why the two shows are so different. Like, I mean, wrestling wise, they're different, and nobody can really figure out why that is. Like, they should be good, because the roster right now on the main roster is the best it's ever been.
Yeah,
It's incredible. There are so many good guys on that show, on both shows, and it's strange that on the big shows they never seem to be able to give us like classic matches. Whereas NXT, you watch it and all the way through you enjoy it because and each match is still different, but they all make sense and they're all fun to watch. Like that's the key is, whether or not the wrestling is technically good or not doesn't matter. It's if it's fun to watch. Otherwise, it's definitely fail, because why would you want to sit through a match if it's not fun to watch? And like I was thinking that the other day, what was the last big show that we had?
The last
not the Super Showdown, not that bullshit.
Oh, the one before that.
Was it Hell in a Cell? It was Hell in a Cell.
It was, yeah.
I started watching it, and the first match was Randy Orton versus Jeff Hardy, which I cared very little for both of those guys. So I was like, in my head, I'm like, is it still fun to watch? Am I enjoying this? Like, why am I watching Jeff Hardy versus Randy Orton? And then, there was what was it? Was it a tag? Yeah, it was a tag match on that show, which I think was Ambrose and Rollins versus Ziggler and Drew McIntyre. And I watched that match, which I think was maybe the third one, and I was like, I like that. That's fun. That was a really good match, and so my spirits were lifted. I'm like, they still do have good matches to give us, and I wish they would give us more, because that show wasn't chock full of classic matches.
No.
And the Super Show, fucking whatever, also was not full of classic matches. And I'd just like to say that I have not watched the main event.
I wouldn't bother.
Because I suspect that it will not be a classic. Hey, sidebar, here we go again. I really want to talk about this, by the way. The show lasts 4 hours, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The Super Show lasted 4 hours. The entire last hour was dedicated to one match, which was the main event, and that is why I didn't watch it. Because I'm like, why? In 2018, with the incredible roster that you have, are you giving us an hour of Triple H versus The Undertaker? Like, why would you do that? I understand that because they're in Australia, and this is a big show in Australia, that they want to give them something special to remember all the people who are watching it.
Mm.
I get that. Totally understand that. They want to put on a big main event. That makes sense. However, an an entire hour for that match and the build up and all the shenanigans and all whatever the fuck else happened is insane, given the fact that those two guys. What age is the Undertaker? 53?
Yeah, and Triple H must be about 50 as well now.
Right? Again, I'm not slagging off either guy as a worker. We all know how good both those guys are. But again, it's like 2018, and they don't need that much time. They
totally struggled
don't.
with that time. That was the thing as well. Like, they both looked exhausted, like, pretty early into the match. And then it was a case of, like, spots didn't seem to be going quite according to plan. It wasn't, as you'd expect with them at this sort of age, with their kind of infrequent wrestling schedule these days. Like, it wasn't as smooth as it would have been 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's almost sad to see. Like, I'd rather them just kind of have like a 10-minute match where they can use all the bells and whistles of making it a no DQ and having Shawn Michaels and Kane at ringside. But it seemed like they were just intent of trying to do this as like a big epic, like, Attitude Era style match.
Yeah. But it had no reason to be that.
No.
Like the month before, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns had a match, and what was that, 10 minutes long?
Yeah, if that. It was probably even shorter.
It didn't even seem like it. And that was their main event for the fucking heavyweight championship, right? Which is supposed to be a big deal. And then they give us Undertaker versus Triple H for like, 40 whole minutes? Because there was like entrances and video packages before that, all that shit. So they must have been, I estimate, probably wrestling for about 40 good minutes. Which is, like, why aren't the rest of the guys getting some of that time? I had heard that
Daniel Bryan and Miz only got like, they were not even 3 minutes in total.
Right, which I don't care about because I don't like the Miz. But, like, why did you cut that time? You couldn't have give them an extra 10 minutes. I don't like how could you? It was weird, and I refused to watch the main event because of that. Because I'm like, I'm not putting that kind of time into something that I know isn't going to be good, or that isn't going to justify the time it takes to watch it, which is totally the wrong attitude. And I get that Super Show is, it was a spectacle show. It was special. It wasn't supposed to be, like a main pay-per-view. It was a filler show, much like the last Saudi Arabia show, and much like this next one's going to be. Is it Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
Like, you can tell based on the way storylines go in and the matches that are booked that these shows are filler shows, and you know that they're just kind of passing time till they get to the next big important thing. And you can tell when you watch that because sometimes they drag and sometimes it feels like they're booked poorly and sometimes they have dumbass fucking main events like this. So like sometimes when you're a fan and you're watching it, sometimes you do get the feeling I had watching Hell in a Cell where you wonder if it's all worth it. But then when you watch NXT and you watch their regular 1 hour show, which is booked perfectly because they use the hour they have perfectly, and they give time to the right amount of people per show. Their pay per view, their takeovers are perfect because again they have a tight time frame and they know what they have to do, and they go out and do it, and they do it really well. And they put on a lot of good spots and spectacles and stuff that makes you remember their shows, right? Like
Absolutely.
a moment ago, I forgot that Hell in a Cell was the pay per view before this one, and that's because it wasn't that memorable, which is crazy because Hell in a Cells are usually pretty fucking sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Or used to be anyway. I don't know how good they are these days. Maybe not so good. Whereas the takeovers were always and have always been consistently really good. Like so totally worth watching because if you want to see a main event where it feels like stakes are really on the line, you can watch NXT. If you want to watch some gimmick matches, there's plenty of them on the takeovers. If you want to watch some really good women's wrestling, you watch NXT takeovers because you're gonna get something good. The tag team stuff that for a long time, man, the tag team scene in NXT, while sometimes it seems a bit spotty, is all like the matches they put on are always so good. Like
Mm-hmm.
the ones with the revival were really good, and the Vaudevillains, there was stuff going on there. But then
Yeah.
the stuff that Undisputed Era have been doing, so good,
Hell
just
yeah.
so good.
Those matches with Mustache Mountain were just
Oh,
ridiculous.
magic, weren't they?
Oh man.
So good. But then like you don't get that magic on the main roster, and it's a shame, you know.
I think like you mentioned the 1 hour shows. Like, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the difference between NXT and the main roster comes in because it's not just those 1 hour shows which kind of force them to kind of rotate who appears each week and like the focus on the different storylines and whatever. But it means that they also, because when they tape like 3 or 4 episodes at a time, so they have to have a plan in place for those 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Whereas like when you look at the main roster and you hear about how they're basically rewriting the show as it's happening, like more often than not, it's like there doesn't seem to be like a plan which they stick to on the main roster, whereas NXT just has that kind of vision, so everything kind of is set in stone, and you can kind of just plan ahead. Whereas it just doesn't really happen that way on the main roster.
Yeah, it's more structured, and you can feel that when you watch the show. You can tell that it's way more structured than the main roster stuff because plans don't really change that much in NXT. Everything kind of goes off without a hitch. The only like if there's ever any like issues, it's because somebody got injured or anything like that. But then they always work around it because they have time to work around it and they can make it make sense. And whereas on the main roster, just storylines are dropped or started and they don't go anywhere or
they just don't know what to do.
Yeah, people
like. I mean, what's it been like 6 or 7 weeks now of like Bobby Roode and Chad Gable versus the Ascension, like variations on that theme.
Yeah,
it's just been like they've just been exchanging wins like back and forth.
Well,
with, like no rhyme or reason whatsoever. It's like, how are you supposed to care about this?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't totally hate that because I thought it was good to actually do something with the Ascension. I thought if you like by now their reputation is very tarnished, so you have to start building them up like piece by piece. And this seemed like to me originally it seemed like a good way to start building them up again as a legit threat until they just got their asses handed to them by the authors of Pain. Because then you're like, well, was any of that build up worth it? Because now do the Ascension look like threats to the authors of Pain? Because I don't think so. And then if they have a match, which they probably will, are you at all going to think that the Ascension are going to win, given the way that they've been booked, their entire main roster career? No, because they haven't done enough to make it seem like a legit thing. If the Authors of Pain ran in and just started beating up the Shield, then we'd be like, shit, dude, we better watch out for those guys,
Yeah.
But just beating up anybody, it's not much of a threat, like
what?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to just start beating up somebody who has really has had a little bit of TV time, but it is in no way a threat. Because what message does that send?
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
But
I was going to say though, the Ascension are a good example of a team who were a pretty big deal in NXT, booked pretty well, used the right way, and then they get the call up to the main roster, and then the wheels quickly fall off.
Yes.
Which is something you see happen a fair bit, I'd say. For every, Seth Rollins, you get a Tyler Breeze, or for every Wyatt family, you get the Revival, who've basically been given nothing to do. Or you get a Kevin Owens, or you get a Mojo Rawley. It's I understand the fact that not everyone can, be the top superstar, and they're not gonna get the same sort of focus that they had in NXT as they did on the main roster, because you need, people who are there to do a job essentially.
Yes.
To help put other people over. But yeah, it can be a bit disheartening sometimes when NXT does such a good job of building up your favorites and then making you excited to see them, and then they get up to the main roster and they just aren't used in that same way again. Even Asuka, man, she was kick-ass in NXT.
Yes.
So spectacular, just the way she carried herself and the way she was undefeated for so long and all that kind of jazz. And then she gets brought up to the main roster, and it was all right in the early days, but this past year she's just had that mystique kind of ruined about her.
Yeah, her losing to Carmella, probably in hindsight, not a good move.
Yeah.
But one thing I would like to bring up is, like you said, a lot of the times when they bring people up to the main roster from NXT, it hasn't always worked out. But I think that now people are starting to put out a wee stigma of being called up to the main roster as if it's a bad thing. And I still think that there have been a lot of success stories from it. It's still warranted. And I would say that Asuka, she won the Women's Royal Rumble.
Yeah.
The first ever Women's Royal Rumble. That's big. That's still, she's still
absolutely.
I would still put her on the successful side of people who have come up from NXT, because she's still being used on TV, and I think that right now they have other storylines in place. For example, the way that they're doing the Becky Lynch versus Charlotte thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really, it's interesting. It's good. It's a good use of both of those women. But where would Asuka fit into that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like if they just keep her on TV for now, it's keep her, keep her involved, and keep her active and busy and doing stuff, keep her in the public eye. It's just a matter of time before she gets the belt. You know what I mean? It's totally gonna happen. The Carmella thing, didn't see that coming. That was a shame. But yeah, I still think that she is. I still think she's kick ass. Maybe it's me being biased towards Lovely Asuka, but she still kicks ass. You know,
Mm.
and then like as well, Carmella, and I'm gonna say Carmella and Alexa Bliss, two people from NXT that nobody thought were gonna do any good,
Mm.
and lo and behold, both of them have. Now, Carmella is a shitty issue because a lot of people don't think she's that good.
Yeah, which I think is a bit harsh.
I think it's harsh. I think she's very good. She's not the best wrestler, but she's very good at the other stuff.
Yeah,
she can.
I'd say Alexa Bliss is in a similar sort of category as well. Like maybe not the best wrestler, but her
great.
Character work is just brilliant.
She is fantastic at and like her in-ring work is still pretty good. She can work. I'd say she's better worker than Carmella, but she's very interesting and she gets you involved in the matches, which Carmella does as well, because they're both very good on the mic. They're both good at the other stuff. You know what I mean? The in betweens.
Yeah.
Which is very important. So I think they're two guys that nobody expected, because everybody saw guys in NXT like Becky and Charlotte and Asuka, and some the male wrestlers like Samoa Joe and stuff, and they were like, these guys have to do well on the roster because they're so good. But nobody gave any kind of thought to Carmella. I certainly did not think that Carmella would do anything. And
no, she was the last draft pick for SmackDown that year as well.
Yeah, and then look at what they did with her. It was pretty cool. Same with Alexa Bliss. I'd seen her in NXT, but she was like a manager. She wasn't really a wrestler. And then she came up and kicked a lot of ass, and I was really like, I love Blissy. I think she's really great.
Yeah.
So I got nothing but good things to say about her. But we're going to talk more about women in the next podcast, I think. So I'm not going to go too heavy on my... I'm going to write a big list for the next one, by the way, of just like all the women I love in NXT or in the WWE at the moment. It's a big list, man. Their women's roster is on fire.
Yeah.
But we'll cover that in a later podcast. So yeah, I think that there's still been a lot of good to come out of NXT. I think people say way too often that people should just stay down in NXT. It's the best place. But like also the WWE, the main roster, isn't just about pure wrestling. It's about trying to entertain a lot of people at once. And smarks on the internet like us have to remember that we're not all demographics of people. We just aren't. And so you just need people to cater to other interests, and you just need to remember that not everybody, like you said, not everybody can be over at the same time. And well, not everybody can be on top at the same time. You can still be over. Like the Fashion Police, Fandango and Tyler Breeze.
Yeah,
they're over. People like them. They're on TV, and they do stuff. Yeah, they might be jobbers, but they've got a really good. They've got a really good job. It's like I don't know if we ever talked about this, but like Heath Slater.
Yeah.
Like that guy never wins matches, but he's on TV a lot, and he's worked with like so many fucking big names. Even as a jobber, like he's had ring experience against loads of people that he probably never thought he'd ever wrestle in his life.
Yeah. He went through that whole period where he was like wrestling legends, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Like, the Vader one is the one I remember the most.
He fought DDP, didn't he? Or at least got diamond cutted by DDP. But like, if you were to say that guy is field as a wrestler, I would disagree with you, because he's on TV a lot and he's worked his butt off, and he's done a really good job for himself. I would say a lot of that is the same with some of these NXT guys. They're on the show. They're wrestling. They're it might not always be, sometimes not even a 5 minute match, but so long as they're on TV doing their stuff, that's what matters. Like whenever I think back to the Attitude Era, which apparently is the best one, like I told you before, I used to only watch Sunday Night Heat.
Yeah.
So that was where all of my wrestling knowledge came from. And the matches on Sunday Night Heat, God bless them, weren't classics. I have to admit, they weren't all 5-star matches. But you got to see, I used to see Al Snow there all the time. And Al Snow was never a guy that was on TV all the time or, super, super successful. But I liked seeing him there. I just liked him being on TV. And he was always wrestling people that he could have a chance against. It wasn't like Al Snow versus Triple H or anything like that. So it was still entertaining, but on a different level. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes I do. I just watch matches and don't worry about build up and storyline and crap like that. And you just watch it, and then whether or not it's a good match instinctively. Like I said, those matches from Heat were never 5-star matches, but they got me into wrestling. They were good enough to pique my interest. And those were never, you would say that a lot of the guys that were on Heat would have been the same kind of caliber as a lot of the guys we're talking about who came up from NXT. Not necessarily the most popular guys, but still fun to watch. So I think people should stop being too hard on a lot of the guys that they bring up from NXT. Because while they might not be doing the kind of stuff we want them to do, they're still doing what they want to do, which is awesome and admirable. And also, like, not everybody can be, Stone Cold Steve Austin, I think that is also a big problem with internet smarks, is that they're like, they want everybody, like, oh, I wish I was booking that show because I know what I would do. But they just, like, everybody would just be to see him.
Yeah.
And there'd be no fun.
You can't make everyone the world champion, so...
Yeah, but you can't also give everybody the same gimmick. And I think that's what people... They want to, like, I'm a badass. I'm cool. But, like, if everybody was badass and cool, then they're all idiots. Then none of them are cool, Think about it. So, yeah, I don't know what the fuck we were originally talking about, but...
I'm lost now. I can't remember.
Basically, I think that some people from NXT have done really well for themselves, more than others, but I still think that the ones that came up have a place, and they all have done well. Like you said, Asuka hasn't been booked the way we want her to be booked, which is true, and it's a shame, but also remember that she was booked like that in NXT, and her career is still pretty young. The same with Nakamura. People were like, they're ruining Nakamura, and I'm like, are they? Because he's won the King of the Ring, and he's now the United States champion. He's been on TV a lot. He's been main eventing like most of the year. He's put on some like, again, not classic matches, but some pretty good matches. Like, he's still doing well. I wouldn't at all say that he should have stayed in NXT, because I think he's. I even heard Nakamura himself talking about how only now is he really, like, comfortable with the kind of style that the WWE works and the way that they work matches and stuff. So, like, it took him a little bit of adjustment.
Yeah, but then that's almost a part of the shame of him getting promoted to the main roster, because he starts losing what makes him special if he's just wrestling like the WWE style rather than being allowed to actually dig deep into his bag of tricks and be able to, tell these kind of stories that he was telling in Japan, or even like NXT to a certain extent. Like, I don't think he had a great NXT run. Like, it was all kind of a bit downhill after the that first match he had with Sami Zayn. I think it was NXT TakeOver Dallas, because that match was just kick-ass, like, from start to finish. And I don't think he's ever really hit those heights since then. with any NXT or WWE, but
Well,
it's just just one of those things, I guess.
Well, my counterpoint is that the things he was referring to were more to do with timing. Like the main roster is a different way of like you have to time the matches, and like you said, matches change on the fly a lot. So the timing it was hard for him to work out. But also you got to remember that like they do a lot of stuff on the main roster that they probably wouldn't do so much in NXT, like remembering where all the cameras are and working with that. Like that's a thing that I don't think people realize, that there's a lot of like working, remembering which side of the ring you're on and working which area, and so the cameras are there, working the hard camera and stuff like that. So I imagine like a lot of that stuff is what his issue was, and he's like, no, I've kind of worked it out, so I feel a lot better about myself, you know. Not that I'm giving the WWE a pass for the way that they booked him, but like I said, it's a whole different ball game from NXT. Basically, is what we've been saying this whole podcast. Is that it's a whole different ball game, so like for us, we would probably much rather watch NXT than the main stuff, because it's gotten kind of not interesting to us. But that's not to say that it's not still interesting. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we kind of well, the way I look at it is I will watch like 3 hours of Raw, which often feels like it's 6 hours instead of 3.
Yes.
But just for that, like one match or one segment, which kind of almost makes it worth the effort.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I admire WWE for is that they seemingly always can do something that will pique my interest. But I think the issue that you and I have is that these and the issue that a lot of people have, I think, is that these moments are kind of few and far between. And like, obviously, you can't fill a whole show full of like crazy memorable stuff. You have to pace it out right. But I think that's the issue, a pacing issue. They're not. There needs to be more, because, like you said, sometimes the shows drag on, or sometimes the pay-per-views aren't that electric, and they focus too much on moments, which is annoying. This is like a WrestleMania thing, which is bled over into the main roster, but they try to give you memorable moments instead of like, they're more on the spectacle.
Than or just technical. Like basic storytelling, like stuff that kind of brings you in and gets you invested. Yeah. Like there's not enough of that on the main roster, whereas in NXT you can kind of see over the course of 8 weeks like how they build up between takeovers, like all these different stories and stuff, and it makes sense, which is the thing that separates it from the main roster for me. Is just
it doesn't make any sense.
More coherent.
Yeah, see, wrestling doesn't make sense. We brought it all back. And if I may bring us full circle once again, because we're just drawing circles here, like one of the spectacles that really got me interested in wrestling again was the original NXT thing, where the Nexus appeared, because I remember watching that and thinking, shit, dude, that's really cool. It's changed the game. It's got me really interested. It's a really good angle. And they need more of that kind of thing. Because that was a big moment when you watched it. You could tell. You could feel it. And that they haven't, like the main roster hasn't really given you like something like that in a long time. Which is a shame. But, it's not to say they can't do it. We hope they will. We hope they will. Is there anything else you wanted to say about NXT?
Just that it's kind of really exciting to see that it's starting to branch out as well now. They've obviously, like earlier this year, announced the NXT UK division, and they've like signed up a lot of kick-ass talent from the UK, like well, they had Pete Dunne and Mark Andrews under contract already, but they've got like Travis Banks, Flash Morgan Webster, Eddie Dennis, Millie McKenzie, Tony Storm, all these like really, amazing wrestlers who've been kind of at the forefront of the British independent scene's revival over the last 10 years. And yeah, it's just an exciting time for NXT, because it looks like this could be like a marker for things to come. They could set up NXT Canada or NXT South America, or and just like keep expanding and bringing in all these new talent and putting on these different shows and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, that's amazing, because gives us more content for one thing, and if it's like following the NXT like US style, then hell yeah, that's going to be a kick-ass show right there. But it's also giving all these like independent wrestlers or guys who've never been on TV a chance to kind of get in there, get over, and then become stars as well. So yeah, it's exciting times.
I think that's a really good point you brought up. I like the idea of them making like an NXT in the UK, because I like the idea of them having like little territories all over the world. I think that's a really cool idea. A lot of people think that, or might think that, it's a bit much, or it's like them trying to get a monopoly over everything. But on the flip side, I think that with a brand as big as WWE, if they were to station themselves in lots of other different countries, for example, you said Canada would be a possibility, which would be a great idea, and the UK one, because we already know there are so many good wrestlers who have come from and are currently in the UK and in Canada, for them to not only snap them up, but to give them the showcase to show their work off to a wider audience is a really cool idea. And they don't have to stay in NXT forever. It's like an option for them to go and work, like we said earlier, to work with these other veterans, because in the UK one, it's got what who Brookside's in the UK one, isn't he?
Robbie Brookside.
Yeah.
Well, he's one of the trainers at the Performance Center.
But like you would imagine, because they've got ties with him and some other British guys, that they're gonna, if they did a UK thing and if they had their own Performance Center in the UK and stuff like that, he would automatically be a trainer there. There's plenty of other British wrestlers that could.
Oh yeah,
do
like
that
Johnny Saint is the general manager for NXT UK. You'd think he's going to be like heavily involved with if they open up a Performance Center over here.
Exactly. Same as if they did it in Canada, you could have Lance Storm there, or like Edge and Christian could show up. You could have like all of these Canadian wrestlers who have that experience and knowledge and pick their brains, And you could do it in Mexico, you could do it, you could open one in Japan, It's I think it's crazy good. It's a really good idea, and I think it is only it's only good for wrestling, to be honest with you. I think it's a great idea. We could talk about that one more and another one maybe.
Yeah, once they actually debut the show and give us something to talk about.
Once we see some of that sweet NXT UK, we'll go over that in another podcast. But so I reckon the future looks pretty bright for NXT right now.
Hell yeah!
Yeah. So let us know what you think about NXT in the comments. Please give us comments. I'm joking. No comments, please. But so that's NXT. Let's see how good it is in a couple of years' time. We'll do another podcast in a couple of years, and we'll see how good it is. But I have a feeling it's gonna be pretty fucking sweet. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.